Near the city of Buenos Aires, local fishermen went out to sea in their old boats to dive deep underwater, where they retrieved pearls from oysters on the very bottom. Suddenly, one of them spotted a strange creature with large frog-like eyes that could freely swim and breathe underwater. The diver scrambled back into his boat, screaming in terror in all directions about the sea devil that was right beneath them. The fishermen made straight for the schooner from which their employer, Pedro Zurita, a harsh and wealthy pearl merchant, was watching over them. He ran up to one of the frightened divers, but upon hearing that the man had seen the sea devil, he threw him back into the sea. His future fiancée, a young woman named Ichthyander, witnessed what he had done and was horrified. Pedro approached her and, trying to calm her, confessed his boundless love, expressing disappointment that she did not return his affections for all his care. With great passion, he embraced and kissed her, after which the girl, trying to flee, leaped overboard like a fish. Her father, Balthazar, began to scold his stubborn daughter and tried to bring her back, but it was no use. She kept swimming toward the shore. Suddenly, the fin of a great white shark appeared above the water, and Pedro jumped into a boat in an attempt to save his fiancée in time. While he swam, the girl lost consciousness and began to sink to the bottom, and at that moment the sea devil, having spotted the shark's attack, rushed at full speed to battle the predator, striking it with a knife. After the victory, he swam up to the girl and, without hurrying, began to raise her to surface, then toss her into the boat where bewildered Pedro was trying to master his own fear. Returning to the bottom, the sea devil picked up a small string belonging to the girl and continued on his way in good spirits. Back on the ship, Don Pedro said nothing about the strange rescue of the girl and claimed all the credit for himself. That evening, sitting in the cabin, the father was urging his daughter to marry Pedro, whom she did not love. After a knock at the door, the rescuer walked in, dressed in a fine costume and carrying a bottle of liquor. Ichthyander rose from her seat, breaking a cup of tea in the process, said thank you, and left the cabin in a half-faint. After this, her father informed Don Pedro that the girl agreed to the engagement. This greatly pleased the future son-in-law, and he decided to share his plans. He intended to dismiss all his workers and keep only the sea devil, whom he had seen close to the boat. While they decided her fate in the cabin, Ichthyander was breathing the fresh air when she suddenly heard a voice. It was the sea devil, sitting on the anchor, asking how she was feeling. In great fright, the girl ran across the deck, rousing the entire crew, and a full-blown panic broke out. Pedro offered Ichthyarder's father a partnership, but first the sea creature had to be caught. At that very moment, it was swimming into an underwater cave with a closing metal grate. That same day, a local journalist named Olsen came to the house of the famous doctor that stood on the mountain. Upon entering, he and a servant rode up in a futuristic elevator, cut directly into the rock, and then he was led into a very beautiful study. Dr. Salvatore emerged from a secret door to meet him. Having settled comfortably in their armchairs, the journalist asked whether he believed in the sea devil. Devils do not exist, neither sea ones nor land ones, the doctor replied, and offered him a small bite to eat. Meanwhile, near the doctor's house, Don Pedro and Balthazar were trying to search the area where the sea devil had most often been spotted. With a burning torch and a heavy stone, Balthazar descended underwater, where, after walking a little along the seabed, he discovered an underwater cave sealed with a metal grate. Rising back to the surface, he told Don Pedro about the burrow that led into the rock upon which the famous doctor lived. After a hearty lunch, Olsen asked the doctor for some money to pay his newspaper's fines. Salvatore was willing to give money to him personally, but not to a newspaper that published political material. He then delivered a speech in which he spoke of his intention to save all the poor by resettling them in the ocean. Imagine, the doctor continued, an underwater world where there are no rich and no poor, and where one can breathe underwater like the fish. Olsen joked about it being a fairy tale, whereupon Salvatore opened a hidden door that led to a futuristic elevator. They descended into a cave with a large window, looking out onto the very bottom of the ocean. Suddenly, the reporter caught sight of the underwater creature known as the sea devil, and the doctor said that this was his son Ichthyander, the first citizen of the underwater republic. A few minutes later, a young man came in, removed his mask and helmet, and headed up the staircase. Salvatore explained how he had saved his son, who had diseased lungs, by transplanting gills from a shark. Olsen explained that the underwater republic was a utopia that would never work. Just then the son returned, having changed out of his costume, and Olsen, quickly shaking his hand, swore to keep their secret. That evening, as the doctor was examining his marine specimens, he told the young man that he had brought entirely the wrong things, and that he was also attracting too much attention from the press. Ichthyander shared the news about having rescued a beautiful drowning girl who had been unconscious. The father waited a moment, then suggested he go to sleep, but not in the sea, because he was not allowed to spend too long in the water. The son disobeyed, put on his costume, and set off to the night city in search of his beautiful stranger. Losing all track of time, Ichthyander wandered through unfamiliar streets until morning, unable to remember where he had come from. The The father called Olsen and asked him to help look for his son in the city. The sun was blazing hot, so the young man decided to climb into one of the outdoor pools for a swim, thereby amusing everyone in the vicinity. By chance, a fish merchant noticed a vagabond attempting to steal her fish. Ichthyander shoved the man into the water by force and began giving the fish away for free, explaining that there were enough fish in the ocean for everyone. After this incident, Ichthyander finally caught sight of the very same girl who was standing and talking with the reporter Olsen. She wanted to borrow his car, but it turned out it had already been sold to cover debts. She then suggested he pawn his pearl necklace, and that to do so they would meet the next day at the dance festival. Unable to restrain himself, Ichthyander rushed into her shop and then jumped up onto the bar counter, asking strange questions. She was frightened and tried to run away, but he confessed to her that he had fallen in love with her at first sight. Their conversation was overheard by Don Pedro. He immediately seized the girl and tried to take her away, but Ichthyander with a deft move knocked him to the floor. Pedro threw a chair, which shattered the shop window, and at the noise the police came running in. The young man had to jump through the broken glass and escape from the pursuing police by leaping across rooftops. Arriving home, Ichthyander announced that he would go to the beach again that evening. His father was against it at first, but eventually agreed. Beneath the cliff, above the secret passage, an ambush was waiting for the young man, and when he swam out of the cave, he was caught in a net. In a costume like his, it was far too difficult to break free, so he had to use his knife to cut the ropes. This time he managed to escape from the strange man. Toward evening, when Ichthyander was getting ready to go to the dance, her father announced that the wedding would take place that Saturday. She replied that perhaps there would be no wedding at all. On the shore, the festivities were in full swing, and Ichthyander and Ichthyander danced, rejoicing in life as though for the last time. When they decided to rest on the parapet, an acquaintance came up to them and accidentally knocked her handbag, with the necklace inside, into the ocean. Ichthyander, without undressing, jumped in first, and after him went the other willing participants. The depth was quite considerable, so everyone else returned to the surface, while Ichthyander calmly walked along the seabed. At last he surfaced with a loud cheering of the crowd, holding the handbag in his hands. Already on shore, he returned Ichthyander's valuables and presented her with a beautiful coral, when suddenly Olsen called to the girl from the cliff above. Ichthyander understood that the reporter loved her, and so he was leaving now to meet her again tomorrow. When Olsen came down to her, Ichtyander handed him the pearl necklace, which he would pawn in order to cover the debts. At home, Ichthyander gave himself over to melancholy, imagining himself swimming in the open ocean together with his beloved, who had also become a fish person. The next day, they met in a secret place. There he gave her a dozen pearls he had recently gathered from the seabed. She refused to accept them, so he simply threw them back in the ocean and was about to leave. Unexpectedly, 2 policemen arrived along with Don Pedro. They put handcuffs on the young man and accused him of stealing the pearl necklace. Ichthyander then jumped into the water so that everyone would think he had drowned. On Saturday in the church, to the loud sound of bells and organ music, the wedding of the happy couple took place, only the bride was not all happy. Olsen learned that the reason she had agreed to the marriage was her father's enormous debts. Ichthyander read in the newspaper that his beloved had become the new owner of a country villa and decided to pay her a visit. Meanwhile, at the villa, Ichthyandra had barricaded her door, refusing to let her new husband into the bedroom. Unexpectedly, her father arrived, quite drunk, wishing to see his daughter. The master told the guard to throw him out onto the street and never let him in again. At night, Ichthyander quietly crept up to the girl's window and knocked. A maidservant Pedro's noticed this and promptly informed him, then together with him began to eavesdrop on the conversation of the 2 lovers. Ichthyander had to tell the truth about why he had not drowned, because he was, in fact, the sea devil. He also revealed that it was he who had saved her from the shark, not Don Pedro. They then decided to run away together. But suddenly the estate's guards rushed at him and managed to bind the young man. The following day, Ichthyandra was locked in the cabin of the schooner. While on deck, Don Pedro promised Ichthyander that if he brought him a dozen pearls, he would be released immediately. After 40 minutes, the young man returned with the pearls, but the master refused to release him and ordered him back into the water. At that moment, not far from the schooner, a submarine appeared, and Pedro ordered the anchor dropped together with the bound Ichthyander. On the submarine were Dr. Salvatore and Olsen, who ordered the release of the young man, threatening otherwise to put a cannon shot through the vessel. When the doctor came aboard the schooner, Ichthyandra cried out that they had tied him to the anchor. They had no choice but to raise the anchor and free Ichthyander. But the doctor did not take the girl with him, as she was, after all, Pedro's lawful wife. Returning home, the doctor decided that it was no longer safe to stay there, so they would leave for warmer seas. A servant rushed in and reported that the police had arrived. Ichthyander managed to escape through the secret door, and then swam through the underwater tunnel out into the ocean, where divers were already waiting for him. With great effort, they managed to bring him to the surface, and he was then arrested aboard a schooner. His father, who remained in his house, was also arrested. The next day, Don Pedro came to visit the doctor in prison. He offered to return his freedom, his money, and his fame in exchange for hundreds of new Ichthyanders to work for him. The doctor furiously rejected this foolish proposal. When Pedro left, the prison warden offered to free Ichthyander in gratitude for the doctor's past help to his son. That same evening, the girl's father came to see her to deliver a letter from Olsen, but was unexpectedly snatched away by Don Pedro. Entering the room, the master read in the letter that his wife intended to run away with Ichthyander. To thwart the escape, he wanted to call the police, but Baltazar drew his large knife and stabbed Don Pedro, after which he told the police that he had killed a man. At night, the prison warden opened the barrel in which Ichthyander had been kept all this time, and then, walking through the corridor, the young man saw his father behind bars. The doctor explained to his son that from the prolonged confinement in water, he would now be unable to remain on dry land for more than half an hour, which could prove fatal. At that moment, Olsen was already waiting for Ichthyander by the car inside the prison courtyard. The young man managed to get into the car in time, after which they quickly attempted to flee their pursuers, heading straight for the ocean. Upon reaching the water, Olsen put him into the sea, and Ichthyander felt greatly relieved. The young man explained to Gutierre that he could no longer live on dry land, and that therefore he was saying goodbye to her forever. Such was the sad ending.